Welcome to the Silent Screams, where the quiet isn't peace. It's a warning. Every story you'll hear here is said to be true, whispered by those who lived to tell it, and by those who didn't. So turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and listen closely, because the things you're about to hear aren't just stories, they're the echoes of real nightmares. Pause. Faint sound of a distant scream, then whisper. This is the Silent Screams. Evelyn Harper did not sign a lease for a haunted life. She signed one for a 600-square-foot third-floor walk-up, marketed as sun-splashed and professionally renovated. A ribbon of light and hope in a city that devoured both. The realtor's smile had been too bright, the paint too fresh, the rent suspiciously gentle for an Upper East Side address. Still, after a winter of couches and sublets, after the breakup that split her apartment and her heart down the middle, only 237 felt like a door finally opening instead of slamming. She carried the last box over the threshold and stood there, listening to the bones of the buildings settle around her, like an animal deciding whether to accept a stranger. The floorboards answered in a sequence of soft creaks that sounded almost like words. She chose not to hear them. The first thing she noticed was the corner. Every room has one that hoards shadows, but this was different. Even at noon, the north wall refused light, as if the geometry of the room bent wrong. The sun pulled inches short of it and lay on the floor like a dog that knew better than to cross a boundary. Evelyn laughed at herself for noticing. Quirks, she said aloud, testing the apartment's acoustics. Her voice returned thinner, trimmed of warmth. She unpacked mugs, a framed photograph of her mother, a plant that had survived 3 moves and 2 forgettings, and placed them where they might suggest stability. Her cat, Milo, hopped from box to box and then froze, his tail exploding into a question mark at the sight of the far corner. He hissed, a sound she had never heard from him. "Don't be dramatic," she told him, and turned on the floor lamp she'd bought on Marketplace. Its shade the color of weak tea. The bulb flickered once and steadied, throwing a honey wash across the room. The corner remained darker, not black but full, as if it contained more night than volume allowed. She stacked books to hide a scuff, covered a stain in the wood with a rug whose pattern made her think of subway maps. By evening, the space looked lived in enough to trick the eye. She ate takeout on the windowsill and watched the river of headlights 3 blocks west, tiny prayers moving in 2 directions at once. When she lay down that first night, the bed pressed unfamiliar against her shoulder blades. The city murmured through the walls, a long exhale of plumbing, a siren running its finger along the street. Somewhere nearby, a neighbor laughed, then stopped abruptly, as if remembering a promise to be quiet. Evelyn closed her eyes and rehearsed the script of a fresh start. A new job she'd almost convinced herself she liked. A new space to prove she could live with herself. The soft ticking of an ordinary life. A lingering breath threaded the room, too delicate to own, to present, to ignore. She opened her eyes to the dark and found it crowded. The corner held. She told herself she was tired. Sleep, like a shy guest, came anyway. The first whisper arrived at 2:37 a.m., punctual as a commuter train and intimate as breath on the nape of the neck. Evelyn woke like a pulled thread. No dream, no soft edge to cling to, just a voice that did not belong to any neighbor she had yet catalogued. One word, then another, as if someone were reading a list in a room down the hall with the door mostly shut. She held her breath and heard her own pulse knock at her ear. On the nightstand, her phone read to 37 in indifferent numerals. Milo sat like a carved thing at the foot of the bed, fur raised along his spine, eyes fixed on the corner as if paid to witness. "Hello," she said, and hated herself for it. The apartment arranged itself around the question. The hum in the corner deepened, almost imperceptibly, a sub-basement tone you feel in your teeth. The whisper paused and resumed, not louder but nearer, as if the wall itself were a flute and someone's mouth pressed to it. She got up, each floorboard offering a report, and placed her palm against the plaster. Cold bled through her skin, a winter that did not belong to the season. The whisper stopped. She stood there, hand on the wall, feeling suddenly foolish, then suddenly watched. A shape of thought pressed back, no outline, only the sense of an idea with its own appetite. Evelyn retreated to bed, left the lamp on, and scrolled deliberately. News headlines, recipe videos, a stranger's vacation photos in a sunlit country. The whisper did not return, but the quiet was a held breath. At 3:12 the refrigerator thudded awake, and she let herself laugh. Too loud, and Milo flinched out in the morning. She blamed thin walls, old plaster, the building's clandestine orchestra of pipes. At lunch, she mentioned it to Mr. Rossi, the superintendent, whose eyebrows met in a single grey current. "Old buildings talk," he said lightly, then crossed himself in a tick he probably hoped she would mistake for a scratch. "You call me if you hear it again." The concern did not match the joke. That evening, returning with groceries and a new bulb of higher wattage, she met a woman emerging from 238, mouth chewed raw at the corners, gaze tuned to an emergency frequency. "You're in 237, the woman asked. "Yes," Evelyn answered. The woman's throat bobbed. "Keep your lights on," she said, voice a burr. "It doesn't like light." She slid a folded note into Evelyn's palm as if passing contraband, and shut her door before Evelyn could reply. Inside the note, 6 words in a clawed script. "It feeds on grief. Don't let it in." That night, 237 arrived like an appointment she hadn't made. The whisper twinned up from the wall, the syllables damp, like speech underwater. She couldn't make out language, only cadence, pleading, then coaxing, then authoritative, like a doctor enumerating options. The lamp buzzed, the dark in the corner thickened, Milo's ears flattened against his skull. Evelyn whispered back without meaning to, a hush meant for a child in a theater. "No." The corner breathed out. The room forgot how to be warm. On the third day, Evelyn knocked on 238. She meant to offer a thank you or a "what did you mean?" but the door swung inward on a hinge that had not decided whether it still worked. The apartment beyond was stripped to echo. No furniture, no lamps, not even the dust imprint where a couch had once stood. The air smelled like old water. "Hello," she called. The empty replied with its only word. She checked the nameplates by the mailboxes in the lobby. No Clara. No woman's name that might belong to the mouth that had warned her. Mr. Rossi stared at the labels as if seeing a magic trick performed badly. 238's been empty since July, he said. "Plaster work, pipes." His glance slid away from her face. Back upstairs, a scrap lay under her door, the corner of a photograph torn across her face. The paper felt cold, as if it had been outside. The remaining shoulder belonged to a man in a corduroy jacket. 1978 or 1979, by the fabric alone standing against a wall she knew too well. Her wall. She put the piece on the counter and felt suddenly like someone had described her from behind. The apartment listened. Evelyn made rules. Keep the lights on. Leave curtains open at sunrise. Do not cry where the corner can taste it. It felt superstitious, which is to say, it felt like hope negotiating with fear. That night, she slept with a podcast rustling from her phone. Voices discussing crimes whose solutions were at least a comfort of closure. At 2:37, the audio hiccuped and stilled. The whisper replaced it, clearer for the absence of competition. A man's cadence, precise. A woman answering breathy, not English, not Spanish, something older, or newer, or wrong. She pressed the phone to record. In the morning, the file contained only a low electrical drone that made her molars ache. She spoke to the wall like a tenant complaining to a landlord. "I signed a lease," she said, her voice both ridiculous and firm. "We share space. You stay there, I stay here." The whisper paused, then issued something that sounded almost like a laugh. Milo yowled, a raw, tearing sound that did not belong in a civilized building, and galloped across the bed to bury himself beneath the blanket. The laugh became a list. She didn't understand the words, but felt their meanings the way you feel a baseline through a wall. Grief, 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 grief. In the morning, the podcast continued where it had left off, as if nothing had happened. The torn photograph piece had migrated from the counter to the nightstand without human help. She took this not as mystery, but as message. "We rearranged your life while you were looking away." She found the whole photograph behind the radiator 2 days later. The radiator had coughed damp heat all afternoon. A dog with a secret. When she nudged the console table to hide a scuff, something thin scraped along the baseboard. A Polaroid slid out like a tongue. It showed a couple in their 20s standing almost where her couch stood now. The window behind them opened to a different skyline. The woman wore a gauzy blouse and a wary smile. The man's mustache belonged to a decade that still answered rotary phones. Their eyes looked red in a way the flash could not explain. Glassy, over-polished, as if varnished by tears no one had wiped. On the back, written in a patient, trembling hand, "It followed us here." She sat on the floor and compared the photograph to the room. The trim matched, The crown molding did too, only the light was wrong. Their light flooded the corner where hers refused to go. Maybe their bulb had been stronger. Maybe the thing had not yet learned the room's topography. She Googled the building name. News archives yielded a missing persons article from 1979. Nora and Patrick Donovan, last seen in September. No signs of forced entry. Neighbors reported strange activity and smells. Police found smears beneath paint that never quite dried. Case cold. Her own stomach practiced the word vanished. The more she searched, the more the story braided with rumor. A seance, a bad man who lived in the basement, an eviction gone wrong, a newborn that never made a sound. The internet will give you everything except the one fact that matters. That night she placed the Polaroid on the mantle as if it were a candle. "I see you," she told the couple. "I believe you." The room flexed under the words, as if the studs themselves had swelled. At 2:37, she woke not to a whisper, but to the soft, obedient sound of footsteps crossing the living room. Bare soles, slow, careful. She did not move. The steps paused by the mantle. Something exhaled as if reading the back of the photograph. The lamp dimmed like a breath, leaving. Evelyn reached for her phone, and the flashlight washed the room with shaky noon. Nothing stood there, yet the air furled and unfurled. A curtain around an unseen body. "You can't have my grief," she said, because the note had told her the rules. The curtain drew back an inch, sulking. Dawn had to be invited before it would come. The storm rolled in with the vindictive concentration of a thought you cannot stop thinking. All afternoon, the sky kneaded itself into bruise. By evening, the city had fewer edges. Water stitched the fire escapes into cages and drummed on window ledges in impatient fingers. At 9:12, a transformer failed somewhere far enough to be abstract and close enough to matter. The building flickered like a blink and then forgot how to make electricity. The refrigerator surrendered with a last wet click. The world pared itself down to wet and dark and heartbeat. Evelyn did everything right. She found her phone, opened the flashlight, spoke her name aloud like a spell. The beam cleaved the dark and laid it in slices. The corner did not dissolve. It thickened, coalescing as if the absence had weight. The light returned to her eyes more slowly from that patch, as if it had to pass through something syrupy. Milo hissed and bolted for the hallway. Evelyn followed because love is sometimes cowardice with better branding. She snatched her keys from the hook by muscle memory and yanked the door open, heart trying to repaint her ribs from the inside. The hall lights should have been on their own circuit, but they only stuttered like a bad heartbeat. Every door from 231 to 241 bore crescents of scratches around their locks. Not old and oxidized, but bright, as if clawed by something that didn't understand how keys worked. Someone onto screamed. Mr. Rossi's voice broke the stairwell's echo. A prayer tucked into orders. "Stay in your apartments. Stay." Evelyn knocked once on 238 before she remembered it was empty. The memory knocked back. When the power exhaled back into the building, it did so in stages. The exit sign, the stairwell's fluorescent gasp, a lamp in two. Finally, the live hum racing along the hallway. She reinterred 237 like a diver returning to surface pressure. The corner waited where she had left it, but the room had been rearranged by absence. The Polaroid lay face down on the floor. The rosary Mr. Rossi had given her weeks earlier. She didn't remember taking it sat on the mantle in a perfect loop, like a mouth-making. And when she flipped the photograph, the couple's eyes had paled, as if the color had washed out with the power. On the back, a new word had appeared in the same trembling hand, or in an imitation close enough to hurt. Hungry. The next morning, power was normal, and normal felt like a lie told kindly. Mr. Rossi rapped on her door at 10 with a toolbox and a guilt that made his shoulders rounder. "I will check your outlet," he said. But what he checked was the air. He stood at the threshold and would not step farther, as if the floorboards beyond had been freshly varnished with something sticky. He slipped a plastic rosary from his pocket to her palm. "For comfort," he said. He was not a man you'd peg for religion. Belief had been installed by necessity, not faith. "I think something bad happened here," Evelyn said, a statement shaped like a request. He nodded once. "A long time ago," he answered, "long enough for men with clipboards to say it is over." He glanced at the corner without moving his head. "Do not invite it," he added, and she heard the capital letter. She set rules you could print and tape to a refrigerator. Daylight, curtains wide, night, lamps on in pairs, no crying inside the apartment, music never. At 2:37, Salt line poured along the baseboard with the seriousness of an electrician laying wire. She researched rituals as if preparing for the LSAT, saints and sigils, sage bundles, and sensible warnings about carbon monoxide poisoning. She laughed at herself, then kept the salt. Sometimes surviving means allowing two contradictory plans to be true at once. She wrote the Donovans names on an index card and leaned it against the Polaroid. "If you're here," she said, feeling absurd and steady, "I'm sorry for what happened. I won't forget you." The room did not change temperature, but the shadow's edge fluttered like breath on soup. That night, 237 arrived, wearing new clothes. The whisper had learned her name. It tested it with care, pronouncing each syllable as if pulling it from her. "Evelyn," the wall said, and every letter found a place under her ribs. A memory she did not want rose slick to the surface. A bathroom with a lock she had not used. A test taken alone. A decision made with an ache behind the eyes. A silence she had never named. The whisper grew keener. She realized the thing did not simply eat grief. It curated it. It pressed thumb to bruise and waited for the sweet. She stood in the doorway until the hour bled away, and when the clock read 2:41, the apartment let go of her name, as if conceding this particular round. She slept with a lamp burning like a saint whose statue had learned to sweat. By the end of the second week, she had learned the shape of its hunger the way you learn the preferences of a demanding roommate. It liked solitude. It liked routine. It liked the moment after a laugh, when the face relaxes into the old expression. It adored anniversaries. Social media did not help. The algorithm served her the engagement photos of the man who had once shared her rent and her winter coat in the first snow. She blocked, then unblocked, then blocked again, ashamed of the primitive math of attention. The corner pulsed approval each time sorrow stirred. So she starved it with noise. She invited Grace from work for wine at 7. She opened every lamp and let their halos overlap until the room wore a crown. She placed the Polaroid face down like a sleeping child. Grace, whose kindness came with a sharp edge that cut what needed cutting, joked about exorcisms and rent control. "If it's haunted, charge it utilities," she said, and took a sip that turned into a flinch. "Your corner is darker than physics," she added, too lightly. "Also, your cat is staring like he knows a punchline." At 8:13, Grace stood to use the bathroom and stopped, sudden as a bird hitting glass. "Who's that?" she whispered. Evelyn followed her gaze. In the reflection of the dark television, a smear that suggested a man's shoulder crowded the frame, standing in the corner where no one stood. The lamps hummed harder. Grace laughed it off immediately, clumsy and bright. "Bad glare," she said, listing the facts of optics like rosary beads. When she left, she hugged too quickly and said, "Stay with me tonight," as if offering a couch could cure architecture. Evelyn did not go. She sat on the floor and texted, "I'm fine," the way people do when they are inventorying exits. The corner breathed in. "You can't have this," she told it, and it answered with a new trick. The scent of her mother's perfume, a drugstore rose that had veined Evelyn's childhood. For a second, just the length of one blink sheath, she cried then, helpless against the counterfeit tenderness, and the dark swelled, pleased. When she could breathe again, she said, "That was cruel," and the room settled as if satisfied by the admission. She slept on the couch, lamps blazing, Milo, a guard in miniature, at her feet. Sleep staged a strike. If she drifted off, she jerked awake with the taste of wet chalk in her mouth. She bought a motion camera and pointed it at the corner, half hoping for a prankster to blame, half terrified of getting proof she could not file under a category other than unacceptable. In the morning, the footage contained an absence of square of static where the corner should have been, as if the pixels refused the assignment. At 2:37, a thin stream of water opened from the kitchen faucet and ran until the minute completed its small tyrannical loop. She played the clip again and again, learning nothing except that modern technology can agree to be ignorant. She took the Polaroid down and looked for clues she might have missed. In a faint reflection on the window glass behind the couple, another figure hovered near the crown molding, too tall for the room, its head cut off by the frame. She put the picture back and did not mention the figure aloud. The corner swelled as if she had named a secret without using words. That night, the whisper changed key. It catalogued her abandonments. The aunt she'd stopped visiting when the hospital smell turned each hallway into a judgment. The friend whose calls she avoided during the friend's divorce because she did not know how to carry more weight. The pregnancy test. The message to her ex she never sent that said, simply, "Come home." The voice offered no accusations, only inventory. Like a clerk balancing a register and finding the numbers do not love you. I know, she said to the dark. I know. The admission did not shrink the shadow. It made the edge go soft, as if the thing approved of honesty the way a collector appreciates provenance. At 4:02, when she finally slept, she dreamed of Unit 237, with the ceiling removed and the sky pouring in like milk. Figures ringed the room at the height where the ceiling had been, heads bowed. When she awoke, her throat hurt as if she had been singing or begging. She wrote a note to herself and taped it to the lamp. Do not apologize to the dark. The note looked childish in the morning, but saved her at night. The way a lifeguard's whistle is ridiculous, except when it pulls someone back to shore. On the first Sunday in October, she decided to leave. Decision can be a flavor. This one tasted like copper and relief. She packed a suitcase with the efficiency of someone who has learned what matters and what can be replaced at a drugstore. Mr. Rossi knocked while the zipper still held its breath. You shouldn't run, he said, not paternal, just tired. It goes with you if you do. She hated the sentence for its suggestion of a world in which exit was a circle. I didn't invite it, she said. He shrugged, palms up, penitent. Sometimes you don't need to invite what lives in a place. Sometimes the place invites you. What else? She asked, and he did not answer, because answers with power must be earned or they won't hold. After he left, she opened every window, though the day was cold, and the city flowed in with its ambulances and arguments, and someone practicing trumpet to buildings over. She set the Polaroid in the center of the floor and sat cross-legged with Milo in her lap, his heart a fast bird. I am not leaving you here, she told the room, the couple, the corner, but I am also not yours. The word yours hit the wall and came back wearing different shoes. At 2:37, it arrived for what she realized was negotiation. The whisper did not plead. It offered. It could place a hand where the ache lived and quiet it. It could make time soft around certain dates. It could take the weight from the corner of her bed where absence sat each morning. She heard all this without hearing it. Meanings pressed directly to the brain. No, she said. And then, because she had learned that refusal must be an action and not just a word, she began to speak names. She spoke the Donovans first, Nora, Patrick lighting candles. She spoke Clara, because someone should. She spoke her mother, and the baby who had never been. She spoke the version of herself that had believed love could be a plan instead of a person. The room buckled, a ship in chop. The lamp's bulb went white and burst with a little pop that smelled like a new coin taken from its sleeve. The dark surged forward and mashed itself against an invisible wall inches from her knees. The pressure made her teeth a chorus. Milo screamed. Evelyn did not move. If you want something, she said softly, take this. She closed her eyes and gave it not grief, but the shape of grief picture frames arranged without photographs. Meals cooked for no mouth. Nights held open like wounds that decide to become scars. The pressure ebbed, confused. Negotiation had rules after all. The last night, rain needled the windows like static, trying to become a song. Evelyn cleaned the apartment as if preparing for a guest she wanted to impress. She mended the crooked rug corner with blue painter's tape, set a cup of water on the sill, folded a blanket twice, and then once more. Ordinary gestures are talismans when you are very nearly not afraid. At 2:30, she sat on the floor with her back to the corner and her eyes on the door. I know what you want, she said. You can't have it. She took the Polaroid in both hands and, without breaking it, said, you are remembered. The room shifted, a dog deciding whether to lie down. At 2:37, it pushed. The everything and the nothing of it flooded the space behind her. A cold so total it refused to be measured as temperature. It bent around her body, testing for seams. It offered again, sweetened. Sleep without dreams, mornings without the shape of absence. She felt the old ache uncurl in its nest and look up hopefully. Traitor that it was. No, she said, again and again, not to the thing but to the part of herself that wanted the relief. She spoke the names once more. She added her own. Something changed so small it might have been a thought catching. The hum in the corner shifted like a radio station finding true signal. The whisper split into two, then four, then a chorus. And she understood not words, but intention. It was not one thing. It was a roomful of condensed leaving, a sediment of unended endings, a reef built from the calcareous remains of people who had fed it the only thing they knew how to make. If it was a mouth, it had been made by 1,000 tongues. I will not grow you, she said. I will not be your farmer." The room brightened by a shade that did not come from the lamp. She realized with a child's shock that dawn could arrive even without permission. Outside, somewhere far below, a truck shifted gears. "You can starve," she told the corner softly, and opened the front door. Corridor light pooled over the threshold like a blessing. The shadow lurched toward it and stalled, snagged on the mundane holiness of a public hallway with its exit sign and bulletin about recycling. She left the door open and gathered Milo and her suitcase. The Polaroid she set in the hall as one sets bread for birds. She did not look back until she reached the street. The building watched her with blank eyes. She realized then that all along, survival had been less about winning and more about refusing to play. She moved into a friend's spare room in Queens where the corners are normal and the light obeys physics. Some nights, at 2:37, she wakes and waits for a whisper that does not come. She thinks of the Donovans and of Clara and says their names aloud so they do not disappear completely. She keeps the Polaroid in a drawer and, sometimes, opens it just to prove that memory is not always a trap. When the drawer is shut, the room is only a room. She breathes. The city breathes back.